I think they're going to need a third guy, and I don't think Kuzma has it. So I'm going to say that they're more of a Western Conference team. On the other hand, I think when you look at their floor, I think it's possible they miss the playoffs if either of those guys get injured. They just don't have any depth. So I think best case they make it to the Western Conference. Worst case they end up as the 9 or 10 seed.
I completely agree. I just have one question. You're not buying into the Dwight Howard redemption tour?
Not on this team. I don't think he's a great fit with LeBron and Davis. He's going to have to play exclusively five, obviously, and that is going to force Davis to play the four. And then if he's on the floor with LeBron, that means it's going to be LeBron, Davis, Howard. That really limits their options at the other spots on the floor. That pretty much precludes them from playing a guy like Rondo. Even a guy like KCP has not really demonstrated great shooting ability. Kuzma has not been a great shooter. I mean, I'm not really sure who else in this team you're going to play around them. I guess you can play Quinn Cook and Danny Green, but that's a terrible defensive lineup. So I think that Howard is just not a great fit on this team. I mean, I think they would have been much better served letting Davis soak up some of the center minutes and getting a wing who could play, because that's what they really ultimately need around this core.
Yeah, I think the issue with that is Davis doesn't want to play the five. You know, he likes to get out and shoot. He likes to make plays. So we'll see what happens here as the regular season inches closer. But that'll move us into the over-unders. I do agree their floor is missing the playoffs. I mean, we've been saying that with the majority of the West teams that we've been previewing. So DraftKings has the over-under set at 51.5. I mean, given the lack of depth and the injury history with LeBron now is getting up there in age and Anthony Davis, I mean, betting man has to take the over. Do you agree?
I think you
I
mean the
meant the
under.
under. I
Yeah.
do. I meant the under. I meant the
So
under. Don't bet the over on the Lakers.
their over under is 51.5, and yeah, I think to think that they're going to win over 50 games, I think they don't win 50 unless those guys stay pretty healthy, especially with how good the Western Conference is. I think if they stay healthy, they go over. If they don't, they go under. Just looking at the track record of both of those players, I think LeBron has, typically and historically been very good at staying healthy, but he's going into his 16th, 17th year in the league. Meanwhile, Anthony Davis has not had a stellar track record. So I'm betting the under just because I just don't trust those guys to play 75 plus games each. I think there's a good chance they're going to get some rest games and so on, and I think that'll drag them down. But gun to my head, I'd say they make the playoffs.
Yeah, it's going to be a gauntlet out west. I think I've been saying that every week. But let's move across Staples Center to their city counterparts, the Los Angeles Clippers, who I'm excited to talk about. I mean, the Lakers may be the most polarizing team, both in the division and in the league, but the Clippers might be the best. Okay, they had one hell of an offseason. They signed Kawhi Leonard after a long waiting period. Then they go ahead and trade a boatload of draft picks and young players for Paul George, which gives them perhaps the most dynamic and complete superstar 1-2 punch in the league. What I mean by that is Kawhi Leonard has proven now, after disappearing for a little bit while with the Spurs, that he is the ultimate alpha dog in the NBA. He willed the Toronto Raptors to their first ever NBA title, and now he was pretty much the talk of the town in free agency because Kevin Durant was hurt. Took a long damn time, Ben, to figure out where he was going. Ends up going to the Clippers by pretty much saying, listen, if you don't get Paul George, I ain't coming. So the Clippers front office, led by Doc Rivers, pulls off this huge deal, basically mortgages the future, and now they are primed and ready to contend for an NBA championship. So what do you think of that 1-2 punch? And, I mean, where do you see the Clippers and the crew of title contenders here?
Well, with all due respect to their 1-2 punch of George and Leonard, which is tremendous, I think the bigger piece with this team that may be getting overlooked is their depth. Because I would say that when you compare the Lakers with the Clippers, there are probably, I'm just looking at the roster now. There are probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 guys that I'd take before I took the fourth Laker after Kuzma. And I think that speaks to the depth on this team, that they have 11 guys who can legitimately play, who can get out there and contribute for this team in different roles. And I think that really speaks to why I think if you're betting who's going to win the West this year, I think the favorite has to be the Clippers. They can withstand an injury better than any team in the league. If Kawhi Leonard or Paul George miss 40 games, I think they're still a solid playoff team. I just think that they have that level of depth. I think that with one of those guys, they're a playoff team. if one of them missed the entire season, I think they'd still make the playoffs because they're that good in terms of their depth. And I think that really speaks to the difference between them and the Lakers. They're a much better built team. And so I think the Clippers are my favorite to win the title. And I also think that they are my odds-on favorite to win the West. I am a little bit more cautious with saying they'll win the title. I would edge their way, but there's another team I really like that we will talk about next week that I think has a chance as well. But when you look at this team, it's well constructed. They have a number of different ball handlers. They have good shooters. They have guys who can defend. They can play both ways. They didn't overpay their centers. They have guys who can rebound, defend. They can play a lot of different ways. I mean, when you look at Doc Rivers, he's a coach who loves to use different lineups. This is a team that is very, very fungible. They can move around their lineups in a variety of different ways. They can play shooting big men. They can play traditional big men. They can play big on the wing. They can play small on the wing. They can load you up with ball handlers. They can put out defensive lineups. I mean, I think they can really do it all. I loved that they got Rodney McGruder. I think that was an under-the-radar signing. I actually probably like him better than any of the Lakers signings other than Danny Green, who I neglected when I said after Kuzma. Of course, I meant after Danny Green. But I think that a guy like McGruder is a great addition for them. I think they'll be really, really good, and this would be the team that I would pick to be the best in the West this year.
Yeah, man. I mean, they have it all. They have a superstar and a great number two option. I think Paul George has proven, he was on those really good Indiana teams, and then, he went to Oklahoma City and showed that he couldn't be the lead dog. Whether or not he had chemistry with Russell Westbrook or not really doesn't matter anymore. But basically what I'm getting at, Ben, is that Paul George is the ultimate 1A, a great number two option, and I think he's a great fit next to Kawhi. You have a solid point guard in Pat Beverly, who is a defensive stopper, can distribute the ball when needed. So I think that three-headed monster on defense is going to cause headaches for a lot of teams. They have a dynamic bench scorer in Lou Williams, who's arguably the best bench player in the league, even though he's getting up there in age. They have their do-it-all big men in Montrezl Harrell, who's going to play a lot of crunch time five, I think, for the Clippers, because they're not going to be starting Ivica Zubac and expecting him to play big minutes. But then you mentioned McGruder and some of these other depth pieces that they have with Harkless and Shamet and Jerome Robinson. This team is absolutely loaded. Their depth is probably better than 90% of the teams in the NBA. They're ready to win it all. They have a coach with a championship pedigree. The other thing that makes me nervous is there's a lot of pressure to win now. I think Los Angeles basketball is very exciting right now. It's one that, in New York, you can only hope with the Knicks and Nets eventually being good at the same time. But there's pressure to win now. And then news came out on media day that Paul George is going to miss the start of the season. He had surgery on both of his shoulders in the offseason, and they're going to ease him back and not bring him back until November. So you look at the Clippers opening slate, it's going to be the Kawhi Leonard show. And we know with Kawhi comes load management. So do you think the Clippers, with all this pressure and this Paul George news, you see them getting off to a slow start, Ben?
I don't, and I'm really not concerned at all about the Paul George news. And the reason for that is that they have a guy in Lou Williams who can immediately pick up that slack. I think if you're worried about this team, the number one thing you'd be worried about is how does Lou Williams react to this? Does he become kind of a redundant piece on this team because he's not going to get the usage he has in the past few years? And I think the fact that Paul George is going to start the season out is actually going to really help this team's chemistry as he gets integrated in, because it's going to let Lou Williams cook a little bit. It's going to let him kind of do his thing, play some pick and roll, play some iso ball the way he likes to play, and let Doc Rivers kind of twiddle around with these lineups before Paul George gets in, because I don't think that Paul George is a disruptive player at all. He's always been a guy who seems to fit in, and so I think that that's going to work well. And I think the other thing that we haven't even mentioned here is when you look at this team and that depth, they don't have redundant pieces, Jason. I think one of the things that's very easy to do, and you see it with the Lakers, they have a lot of players who do the same things. And Doc Rivers is a master of switching up lineups for situations. And I think you can imagine with this team, you'll see a lot of Lou Williams, Landry Shamet, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, and Montrezl Harrell on offense. Maybe you see a Patrick Patterson or an Ivica Zubac, depending on the situation. But more likely, you'll see a JaMychal Green or a Montrezl Harrell in on offense. And then call timeout, Lou Williams comes out, Patrick Beverley goes in, Landry Shamet comes out, Rodney Magruder comes in, Harrell comes out, Zubac is back in, and all of a sudden you have an elite defensive team out there. So I love it, and I think that depth is going to serve them very well as Paul George is out, because I think those pieces are going to help them be an excellent defensive team on one end, and then they have guys who can really kind of pick up the slack offensively with Lou Williams, guys like Landry Shamet, and so on.
So you hit the nail on the head yet again, Benjamin. If there's any weakness on this team outside of the redundancy, which you said Doc Rivers would mask, it's a lack of a capable center. I don't think Zubac is the answer. Harrell is best suited to come off the bench. So we had talked during our free agency review that if Marc Gasol were available in a trade at the deadline, that I think he'd be a great fit reuniting with Kawhi in LA and kind of being that final piece to the championship puzzle. Because right now, if they're in the market for anything, it would be a capable center. So Gasol, one of those names to keep an eye out for. I definitely think they'll be in the market for another center who can score and kind of keep Zubac on the bench, if you know what I mean. But do you have anything on the Clips before we get to our ceilings and floors?
Well, I would just say I would take the news out of camp, maybe with a bit of a grain of salt, but it sounds like JaMychal Green is going to get to play some center on this team, and he could be the answer for them. And I threw his name out there. It's a little early to tell, but he shot over 40% from three with the Clippers last year. I know that a lot of the interviews with coaches in the lead up have kind of come out that the coaches think he can do that again. And if he increases his attempts, he could become the exact type of player they want from that center position. He's a decent enough defender, and when he's knocking down shots, he creates the space for the rest of those guys. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if they feel like JaMychal Green could be kind of the answer for them. A lot of the coaches there that were interviewed in the offseason and in training camp have been raving about what he can do. He kind of went through Zach Lowe talked about this in one of his articles, but he kind of bet on himself and had potential to end up overseas, took a small contract to come back, and now, it looks like it's going to pay off for him. So we'll kind of see what happens, but I think JaMychal Green might be kind of the missing piece for the Clippers and the guy that maybe people are sleeping on right now.
Yeah, I'd love to see that happen. So we're not going to waste any of your time. The ceiling, I think we can both agree for the Clippers. NBA champions, Kawhi Leonard winning third ring with a third different team, unprecedented territory. He would win back-to-back championships with two different teams. I mean, this guy is breaking all sorts of records and barriers when it comes to load management and superstars in the NBA. But Ben, I want to talk to you about the floor, because I think that if this team doesn't mesh well, and if injuries do happen, if Paul George is out long term, if Kawhi Leonard suffers a setback, I mean, you said they could lose one of those two and still be a playoff team. So I'm going to say their floor is losing in the second round.
Yeah, I mean, I want to couch this by saying when I say that their floor, I mean, I think we're really talking about if they're healthy, I think this is a Western Conference Finals team. I'd feel pretty good about that. If Kawhi or Paul George were to miss time during the playoffs, yes, I think second round is their worst case. Those two guys are just made for the modern NBA, so I think few teams are built as well as the Clippers are.
Oh, 100%. So I think that their ceiling and their floor, again, just like the Lakers, go hand in hand, although I do think the Clippers are built better than the Lakers by a landslide. So DraftKings has their over-under at 56.5. And Ben, I'm not going to lie, dude, I struggled with this one because it's set at 56.5. But because of how good the Western Conference is, I don't really see any team winning 60 games. So as good as the Clippers are going to be, you have to factor in the load management, you have to factor in the injuries and the chemistry. And I'm taking the under for the Clips. They'll probably win 55 games, but if the over-under set that high, I mean, how do you take the over on that?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I'm probably staying away from almost all of the Western Conference side over-unders. If I was a betting man, I would probably stay away because I think it's going to be really hard, and I think this year is going to be very volatile in terms of injuries. If someone gets injured, I think teams could fall down very, very quickly with the level of parity in the Western Conference. So I'm with you. I think if they stay healthy, similar to the Lakers, I would bet the over, but one major injury for this team to one of their stars, and they could easily hit the under. They could kind of ease Paul George back and then be more like a barely over 500 team, only win 52, 53 games, and then you miss your bet. So I completely agree with you, Jason.
I know you